my favorite fictional character is Kermit the Frog. As he says in Muppets Take Manhattan, you need more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things. You just need more people in the show that will make the show better. So that's a huge solution that, again, that we can do right now by statute. There is no constitutional check on the number of people who can be in Congress. And so we could expand Congress literally by a bill tomorrow.
I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr, and this is Justice by Design, where we don't just talk about the problems that our society faces. We talk about ways to fix them. And that's why I could not be happier at a time where there are so many questions about the rule of law, about democracy, and what our laws are for, at a time when lawyers are under attack and we have to pave a different future. I cannot be happier to be joined by Elie Mystal, who is a legal wonderkin and also the author of the new book, Bad Law, where he takes on 10 popular laws that are ruining America. Elie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. How are you?
I am good. So the thing that I love about this book, other than the fact that even though it's talking about super depressing subjects like how our system of government is collapsing and how laws aren't helping, in fact, they're making it worse, but that it does so by also making you laugh uproariously. So I highly recommend this book because, we got to laugh to keep from crying. But give me the origin story of this book. Why did you want to write about bad laws, and why did you pick these 10?
Yeah, well, obviously scoping was the hardest problem with the book, right? Like there are lots of laws. I haven't read them all. Many of them are terrible, right? So like how do you kind of go from the total universe of laws to just 10? And the thought that I hit upon was, let me just talk about laws that could be repealed today that would make things better tomorrow, right? Many of our laws that I think are bad, that you might think are bad, need to be reformed, need to be updated, right? Need to be massaged for the modern age. And a good example of this is like the anti-drug abuse law, right? I think that's bad. Yeah. I think that's racist. But I'm not going to say there should be no drug laws, right? Because I don't work for the Sackler family. I'm not, trying to get people hooked on opioids, right? There should be drug laws, just not the ones we have, right? The laws that I picked were ones that we truly don't need, and which are functioning in a way to make things worse, as intended by the people who passed the laws. Right. So that was kind of the initial scoping mechanism of the book. But the origin story is truly, Kimberly, I'm on a plane that's delayed on the tarmac and I am losing my mind. I am annoyed at the airline. I'm annoyed at the pilot. I'm annoyed at the seats that's too small. And, as the delay gets into its second hour, I start doing what I do, which is screaming about the Federalist Society. And like to kind of everybody around me, I started screaming about how we were being trapped on this plane because Federalist Society fat cats and people like Robert Bork deregulated the airlines. And before airline deregulation, flying was an entirely different experience, right? And eventually my mother told me to shut up. But as I was kind of sitting there getting annoyed, I thought I was well aware of the Airline Deregulation Act. And I was thinking about how terrible that law is and how it's still, and even though the Democrats who helped to pass the law now agree that deregulation was a bad idea, we still have a deregulated airline industry, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that if I could just tell the story of how Robert Bork led to Jimmy Carter deregulating one of the most important service sectors in our country, people would read that story. Right. Yeah. And as I started to work on that story, really kind of more for a long form article, then the kind of light bulb goes off, so if I had a couple more, this could be a book. So that's the actual origin of like why, of how the book got started.
So before we dive into some of the laws that you think are bad and ought to be done away with, a question that occurs to me always, of course, is, are the laws really the problem? Because we've had laws. We've had a lot of bad laws throughout our nation's history, but it tends to be people with bad ideas and bad agendas who misuse the law. So before we dive in,
Yeah, no,
talk a
that's a
little bit
great that
about the people. Aren't the people the problem?
I would say yes and no. Um
Mm,
how do I want to put this? So as I say in the book, the law, and you know this well, the law is not objective. The law is not given to us from on high. Moses does not come down and find some laws and throw them at us, and like that's not how it happens, right?
it doesn't
We
come down on Truth Social.
right, right. It's not a TikToker who's like, I found the laws, right? No, we choose the laws. We choose to live this way. So everything in the law is at patient zero for every bad law is us. We have done this to ourselves, and so on that score, I totally agree with you that it's our fault, not the law's fault. However, once these laws get into our system, they are like a poison, right? Once they get into our system, they are like a cancer, and they proscribe and circumscribe our choices going forward, right? So,
Yeah.
because of the laws, especially in the kind of English Commonwealth situation, because of the way that laws are built on each other, right? When you have a really bad block, a really rotten block in your foundation, it weakens the entire structure because laws are layered, unlayered, and layered upon each other, right? One of the
Yeah.
examples that I kind of make for this in the book is the Armed Career Criminals Act, which is a terrible law, and even the Supreme Court is like, this doesn't make sense, right? It's really bad, but it has defined our federal approach to criminal justice for going on 40 years now, right? And
Right.
it's
And
like
just to
every
explain briefly, the ACCA is a law that provides for enhancements to certain crimes, enhanced sentences for certain
yes,
crimes on
it's
the
the classic three strikes and you're out law, right? So if
right.
you commit a low level crime and a low level crime and a low level crime the third time and you get caught, boom, you're in jail as if you committed a very serious criminal offense. It was designed to catch only the worst criminals among us. In the book, I say it's designed to catch the Joker, right? But in
Yeah.
fairness, what it actually does is catch low level people like Catwoman who are not career criminals. They're just cat burglars, but now they're in jail like they're the Joker, right? It's
Right.
it's it's a it's a truly unjust law. But because that law is there, we've built so many other terrible criminal laws on the structure of that law. Once you do three strikes and you're out for armed career criminals, as the law said it was doing, it doesn't take but a couple of years before now you're doing three strikes and you're out for drug offenders, right? So now you've literally gone from a law that was designed to catch the Joker, a person who does mass terror and is literally his whole job is to make jokes and commit crimes and defeat Batman. Like that's all he does, right? And you've gone from that to busting a hopper on the corner with a bag of weed.
Right.
Boom, in 2 years. So that's the problem with the layering of the laws. And that's why if you don't go and rip out some of these laws at their root, if you don't take out the root and stem of some of these terrible ideas that we've codified into our laws, our entire society suffers from it.
Yeah. So I want to go where your book starts. Actually, is with the laws, not just one, but the various laws governing voting and our system of voting, which, as you said, it stinks from the root in a lot of ways, and in both nationally and in some specific states that used to um, pass such horrific and um, suppressive voting laws that for a while, and technically still under federal law, it's just a nullified provision of federal law, that the DOJ is supposed to pre-clear the new voting laws in states like Alabama or Mississippi or Virginia, where I lived for a long time. But now the Supreme Court has nullified that. But why did you start with voting laws?
Well, because as you almost because of what you said, right? If we understand that we choose the laws, then who gets to choose, who gets to be in the room where it happens when we're choosing the laws becomes critically important, right? And the way that we are all supposed to be able to participate in the choosing of our laws in a country based on a Republican government based on self government principles, the way that we get to choose is voting. And so if you screw up how we vote, you end up screwing up the whole system. And that's exactly what people have done. I argue that we shouldn't have voting registration requirements, right? We should have voter eligibility requirements. Can't get away from that. I don't want to hear any of these concerns. Oh, he wants dead people and nonsense. No, no, no. You have to be alive to vote. All right. Let's just say that you have to be a citizen to vote. We have various eligibility requirements already. And I'm saying, sure, let's keep having those eligibility requirements. But once you meet the eligibility requirements, why in the hell do you need to meet a pre-registration requirement before you're able to exercise the franchise that you're already eligible to do? Voting registration does not prevent ineligible people from voting. It prevents eligible people from voting. It's voter eligibility requirements that prevents ineligible people from voting. Right. So the idea that after I am eligible, I have to go through steps and hoops 2, 3, 4 weeks in advance before I'm allowed to participate in an election, that's just decidedly meant to suppress the vote. And the people who pass voter registration laws, and when the first kind of round of them said so. One of the things I do consistently in the book, I don't ask people just to take my word for it. I go out and I find what the people who passed the laws in the first instance actually said about why they wanted their laws. And in most cases, they're pretty honest about how they wanted the law to do some racism. They wanted the law to do some sexism. They wanted the law to do something horrible to poor people. They're pretty open about it. And I just reprint what they said. I'm like, look, this is what they said. John Adams says that Massachusetts needs a strong voter registration requirement that prevents poor white men from voting, because if you allow poor white men to vote, what's going to come next? Women voting? Oh, no. Man wrote it down. I just reprinted it. So in most instances, the people who wrote the bad laws were honest about how they wanted them to function, right? And voter registration is just one example of something that was intentionally designed to suppress the vote. That is, in fact, suppressing the vote. So we should be done with it.
So let me push a little bit more on that, Elie, because a lot of the voting laws that are on the books today are actually meant to ensure access to the vote and to guard against voter suppression and the targeting of Black and brown people or others for political gain and to protect the very people that the founders were worried about, which is landowning wealthier white men. So if you just toss out the laws and just rely on, hey, the constitutional says what it is to be eligible, what happens to those protections?
Yeah, so I don't think John Roberts or the current Supreme Court believes that those protections exist, and I don't think those protections exist in any real way in most states. So I'm not kind of worried about losing protections that aren't being enforced right now anyway, right? Yeah. But to take that point kind of to a larger level, I'll go back to UCLA professor Rick Hasen. Right. He wrote a book called A Real Right to Vote. And he pointed out that one of the fundamental flaws of our Constitution is that our Constitution does not state specifically that you have a right to vote. The Constitution is framed in a negative language. You cannot prohibit the right to vote. You cannot deny the right to vote on account of blah, 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 race, color, creed, gender, poll tax. We have a bunch of things that we say that we can't do to prevent people from voting, but we don't have the clear, obvious statement, you have a right to vote in this country. That doesn't exist in our Constitution. That's a flaw. That's a deep problem. And it's a problem because of how our Constitution is structured. The people who wrote the Constitution did not think that the national government was the entity that conferred voting rights down to the people. They thought the states conferred voting rights, and that was then brought up to the national government from the state level. So the Constitution lets each state make its own definitions for who is eligible to vote, who has the right to vote, when you can vote, how early you can vote, if there's going to be early voting. That's why when we talk about election laws, we can't talk about one election law because we don't have one national election law. We've got 50. And if you go to the local level, we've got something like 3,000, right? 3,000 every locality with all their different little rules and regulations around voting. And I think, Kimberly, the scientists call that stupid. It is a dumb way to run a democracy, right? It's not what any of the other democracies do in the world. They have a national system for voting as opposed to a state by state, county by county, province by province system of voting. Our way is dumb, and our way creates confusion and creates the opportunity to suppress, again, the votes of eligible voters, to make it harder for people who are already eligible to vote. That's why they did it that way, right? They wanted to, Georgia wanted to make sure that it could prevent Black people from voting no matter what the federal government said. And Georgia still does a pretty good job of doing that today. So the uber fix, right? The alpha fix for the situation is to have one national voting standard. And if you need a constitutional amendment to do that, then that should be the 28th constitutional amendment, right? That is more important to me than reforming the Electoral College, which I think we need to do. It's more important to me than than passing the Equal Rights Amendment, which I also think we need to do. But I can get around that because I'm like, well, the 14th Amendment kind of says it right there. We could just enforce, right? So there are ways to get around. But if you don't have the ability of people to vote, if you don't have the ability of people to participate in the process of democratic self-government, guess what? You're not a democracy. You're not a republic. You're just you're some other form of government that we tend to not like.
I went into this saying, you can't toss out all the local, like there's a reason that voting is local, and it's, that's how people confer their votes. And that's how, you want lawmakers to go to a local level and appeal to voters. And that's how it's kept safe, because but I have to say that the arguments that you laid out in the book are pretty compelling and are at the very least making me rethink it. And as I'm rethinking a lot of things about our laws and our Constitution over the past several months, and sort of disabusing myself of some old ideas that I had. But I want to, and I encourage everybody to read all the laws that you write about in this, but I want to touch on one that is incredibly important right now, and that is our immigration laws. I agree that they are fundamentally broken. I'm not sure they can be reformed in a way that make them work. What would you do for the immigration law system if Elie Mystal were king of America for a day? How would you fix the immigration system?
I would repeal the Immigration and Nationalization Act. The 1921 law that was updated in 1956 has been a racist law from the moment that it was put on this earth. Literally, and I talk about this in the book, this is a law that was written with the help of a Nazi eugenicist. Like Congress itself, when passing the 1921 Immigration and Nationalization Act, was taking testimony from the person that would go on, the American person, by the way. Remember, we exported eugenics to Nazi Germany. We didn't take it from them. This scientist, Harry Laughlin, would go on to be given a medal by the University of Heidelberg in 1938 for his work on eugenics. Do you know how bad of a guy you got to be to get a medal from the University of Heidelberg in 1938? You're not a good dude, right? They weren't given that to Kermit the Frog, all right? So anyway, this is the law. This is the guy whose science Congress used to write their law. And then Congress itself, when they're writing the law, were saying things like the Immigration and Nationalization Act was important to help stop the mongrelization of the white race and the infection of the white race by the, quote, inferior races of the earth. That's why the law is here, in a law that is that steeped in racism and bigotry and literal eugenics cannot be reformed. It must be repealed. It must be cut out from our system like a cancer. So that's the alpha fix. But I'll give something even more specific, which I talk about in the book. Specifically, the law against illegal reentry, the law that takes illegal reentry into the country and takes that away from a civil offense, right? Which would require a fine and maybe some civil penalties like deportation. To take that civil offense, the Illegal Reentry Act turns it into a criminal offense. That's how people get jailed. That's how people get sent to concentration camps. That's how people get ripped away from their families. That is just disgusting. Even beyond the obvious bigotry and racism that goes into that, that's just wrong. Coming into the country, even if you're not allowed to, even if you're not supposed to, even if they told you before that you shouldn't come in, should not be a criminal offense.
Right.
It should be, if you want to make it illegal, that's fine. There are ways to do that without throwing people in jail for it. Because jail doesn't work. I mean, if there's been one lesson that we should all learn from our quote unquote immigration problem, it's that throwing people in jail does not make people not want to come here. People are still going to try to come here, because getting here is a lottery ticket for a lot of the rest of the world. And the only way we can stop that is if we make our country so crappy that nobody wants to move here, which I suppose Trump is trying to do, but that's going to take a lot of time. In the meantime, people are still going to try to come here, and throwing them in jail doesn't stop them. So all you're doing is ratcheting cruelty on top of desperate people. Legal reentry needs to be repealed post haste. And I'm not the only person that says that. Yeah. Again, there's not, I've said a lot as I've been talking about this book. I kind of feel almost sheepish that I keep kind of saying, like, I did not invent any of the solutions that I talk about. Right? Like the truth is out there. I'm just kind of putting it in front of people, right? So with the legal reentry, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has a bill in Congress. She ups it every congressional session to repeal the illegal reentry part of the INA, right? To just get rid of that. She's willing to talk about immigration reform and do whatever, do other things, but illegal reentry is a criminal offense. That just needs to be repealed. Ayanna Pressley says it every freaking year.
So,
right? Go ahead.
What makes it, just to make your point, or help make your point, is that it doesn't address any of the so-called perils of illegal immigration, right? I mean, the ones that keep put forth. Crime is another one, that's really it. Like, immigrants are scary and they're doing crimes. The facts, I just want to underscore, the facts could not be clearer. Everyone, Cato, conservative institutions, liberal institutions, nonpartisan institutions have done the research, and people who are in the country, immigrants writ large, but particularly immigrants who don't have authorization to be in the country, are far, far less likely to do crimes in America than other people, because they don't want to get sent out. They're here for a reason. They're just trying to work their jobs. They're just trying to feed their families. They're just trying to get along and try to make their way through a system that's horribly broken, which is why many of them are here without authorization, because the process itself is bad.
They're trying to stay. When the looting happens, they're not going to loot the target.
No,
they're like, no.
Not doing the crime.
Right. I don't got my papers. No, you go find the television. I'm going to stay here and show up to work at the Target in the morning. That's what I'm going to do, right? But it's so you're 100% right about that, obviously. But I also just like to point out to people, because I feel like this gets lost a lot of times in these debates, and it happens a couple of times for a couple of chapters in my book. We have criminal laws that make it illegal to commit crime. And
there's already a solution.
There's already a solution, and there's a sense of justice that I feel is so lost by certain people in this country. And to me, justice is the simple idea that people should be held accountable for what they actually do, what they do, not what people who look like them did. Not for we're not Tom Cruise. We're not precogs. We don't know the future. You can't punish somebody for what they might do or what people who look like them do. We don't live in that kind of society. Justice means holding people accountable for what they actually do. So if you bring to me an illegal and an out of status person who committed a crime, I'm like, well, charge them with a crime. Right. Why do I care what their status was when they committed the crime? If you can prove they committed a crime. I say in the book, if I get shot, if I get murdered by an undocumented immigrant, please tell my children I did not care that they were undocumented.
Right.
I cared that they shot me. Please use every legal means you have to catch the person who murders me. That would make me happy. But
that's right.
I don't care about their status. That doesn't help me.
And we know with our current administration, they give it away when in their bid to defend the unlawful deportation of a Maryland father who was legally in the country. In fact, there was an order uh, that he not be deported to El Salvador because of the threat he faced there. I'm talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. In defending that, the administration brought in the mother of someone who was murdered by someone who was in the country without authorization, as if it's a one size fits all thing. I mean, one has absolutely nothing to do with the other. Um, uh, the misuse, the abuse, the using this poor woman's pain to make a point that has nothing to do with her case. I say, please find, arrest, uh, punish to the full extent the perpetrator of that crime, and also bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia home as the law compelled you to. Two things can be true at the same time, but that gives you a little bit about, gives away a little bit about what their real reasoning is behind their immigration policy. So before we run out of time, because time flies so quickly with you, Elie, I just want to talk a little bit about solutions overall. One thing that I find great, I mean, you talk about solutions throughout the book, of course, but you have like, the first thing I looked at when I looked at the table of contents is like, oh, the solutions are in the back. And it's this tiny little, section in the back about fixing it. How do we fix this? How
Burn
do
it.
we
No.
fix this?
That's the fire is how we fix it. I start with voting and I end with voting, and I hate to end with voting. I say this in the book, like I never want to tell people vote harder, right? People do vote, and frankly, the kinds of people who are going to read a book that I write already vote quite a lot in most elections, right? It would be almost intellectually dishonest for me to tell my readers just vote harder. I mean, they're voting already, right?
Yeah.
So I try to get people to think about voting smarter, right? One of the reasons why I highlight the laws that I do is that as I say in the book, in the title of the book, these are all popular laws. By that I mean they all enjoyed broad bipartisan support when they passed, right? And that means that if you're on the left side of the aisle, as I tend to be, that means a lot of your own people, Democrats, voted for these laws, and we can ask them to stop, right? And we can ask them to stop in the primary process. So again, people who read me are likely people to be voting in primaries to begin with. Ask your senator, ask your congressperson before you pull the lever for them, do you still support the Hyde Amendment? Because that's stupid. Why do you do that, Senator whoever? Congresswoman whoever? Why would you do that? Why would you ever sign a budget that included the Hyde Amendment? Again, you can ask them that in the primary process. I promise you, somebody running against them will be like, I would never vote for the Hyde Amendment. And let's go. Let's have our debate there, right? So like a big thing is that I'm trying to say as a solution is for people to vote smarter, not harder. But also that we just need to make it easier for people to vote, and we need for our democracy to be more representative. So one of the stats that I bring up in the book is that we are the least representative democracy per capita in the world. And then by that, I mean our one congressperson represents more people here than the lowest ranking national legislator represents in any other country of the world by a significant margin. One congressperson here represents about 760,000 people. The next closest country is Japan, where one legislator there represents 500,000 people or so. So we are off the charts in terms of our lack of representation, and we can change that. There are 435 people, and there is nothing in the Constitution that says it has to stop there. And in fact, for the first 100 or so years of this country, 100 plus years of this country, we regularly added Congress people every single census. We did that every census from 1790 to 1920 when we would do the census. You know how currently we do it, and when we redistricted, we're like, oh, New York loses 2 and Arizona gains 2.
It's a zero-sum game the way it is.
It's a zero-sum game right now. We used to not do that. We used to say like, oh, Arizona's bigger. Boom, 2 more Congress people, right? And if we went back to the level of representation that we had in 1920, which is the last time we added Congress people, instead of 435 Congress people, we'd be at 1,200 Congress people. right? And
More women, more Black people, more people from the Midwest, more people from farm country, more people from a lot of places that are
you can make lots
underrepresented.
of arguments for how we should be representative. I advocate for what's called the Wyoming rule. Most people know every state, even the smallest state, gets one congressperson. That's just a rule. Our smallest state by population is Wyoming. Wyoming has about 560,000 people. Guess what? Every congressperson should represent 560,000 people because that's how many people are in Wyoming. That's the Wyoming rule. And if you did just that rule, you'd add 128 congresspeople like that, right?
Right. And
And if
again,
you
that's something that's in existence. That's a rule that's already been figured out by somebody.
right, so if you add more congresspeople, you make for better representation of the country. You give frankly minority communities a lot more sway in the system. And by minority communities, I don't just mean like Black and
Right.
Latino people. I mean
Representational
Palestinians
minorities. Yes.
in Michigan are having a lot more say in their politics. Somalis in Minnesota are getting a lot more say in the laws and the rules and of their part of the country. Like
Absolutely right.
you just get more. As I keep saying, my favorite fictional character is Kermit the Frog. As he says in Muppets Take Manhattan, you need more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things. You just need more people in the show that will make the show better. So that's a huge solution that, again, that we can do right now by statute. There is no constitutional check on the number of people who can be in Congress. And so we could expand Congress literally by a bill tomorrow.
So that is one of the many good ideas that can be found in bad law. Elie, tell folks where they can find you within your pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, so I write every week, usually multiple times a week for thenation.com. I even have a weekly newsletter now. I am on Blue Sky at LENYC. I technically am still on Twitter, but I don't use it very much because, fascism. Uh, um, and so that's basically where I am these days.
All right. Well, I thank you for taking some time. I know you're a busy man, but taking some time to join me on Justice by Design. And I thank everyone listening for joining us on this week's Justice by Design. You know where you can find us anywhere you get your podcast. So please make sure that you follow. You can also find the podcast on YouTube at the Politicon channel and also at the Justice by Design channel. And come back next week with another episode. I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr.